Shabbat Shalom. I'm coming to you today in a recorded message for reasons that will be explained a little bit later. I'm sorry I can't be at Beth Yeshurun physically, but for those of you watching at home, it doesn't make hopefully a whole lot of difference. So I'm recording this on a Friday afternoon so that you can see it on Saturday morning. So let's begin. There are a lot of snarky jokes about this year, 2020. It has certainly been a year most of us, would be only too happy to leave behind. We are so much looking forward to a return to normalcy, whatever that may look like, and whenever that may happen. And this Thanksgiving weekend is just another example of the distress and challenges that we have faced this past year. With the pandemic on the rise again, about half the number of people who normally travel for Thanksgiving have taken the advice and warnings of healthcare professionals that it may not be the best time to travel. And even family and friends that live in the same city and traditionally gather in large numbers to celebrate a sumptuous feast for the holidays have stayed home with only nuclear family members. This is not your grandmother's Thanksgiving. It's not even last year's Thanksgiving. And hopefully it won't be next year's Thanksgiving either. But it was 2020's Thanksgiving. In our home, Diane, Daniel, and I decided to get tested for COVID virus last Thursday. I was going to be officiating at a wedding on Sunday, and all the members of the wedding party were getting tested. The wedding, by the way, just for the record, was limited to about 30 people, was held outdoors, everyone wore face masks, and we were all totally socially distanced. Anyway, the test results for Daniel and I were negative, but for reasons we cannot figure out, Diane tested positive. Diane has practically never been outside of our house since March. Daniel and I have been out from time to time, of course, being careful when we did, but how did she test positive while we did not? We can't figure that out. But we have been very blessed that Diane has had no COVID symptoms so far. We still have another week of quarantine to go. In any case, ever since we got the results back on Saturday, Diane has been staying in our bedroom, and I have been sleeping on the recliner in our den. And for Thanksgiving dinner, we ordered meals from Beth Yeshurun, which were really terrific, by the way. Thank you, Kevin, Eileen, and Marco. So we didn't have to cook a big meal for 3 people. And cleanup was pretty easy. But we ate in separate rooms. Yeah, we did the Zoom thing. But still, it's really depressing having Thanksgiving dinner with 3 people in different rooms watching each other on cell phones. But I can't complain. I know that many of our members have lost a loved one this past year. Others have loved ones in hospitals right now. Still others have been unemployed, and I can't even imagine what you all did to make Thanksgiving this year, or if you were able to do anything at all. By the way, if you need assistance, please reach out to one of us or to Jewish Family Services. We're all here for you. Thanksgiving is one of those times that people like to gather in large numbers. We faced a similar situation, of course, on Rosh Hashanah and the Yom Kippur break fast, when we also like to gather in large numbers, and we had to deal with this for Passover Seders as well. So it's not like we don't have experience with this isolation, but it is certainly wearing on many people, which is why, despite the dire warnings from the healthcare professionals, the other half of Americans did travel for the holiday. We will unfortunately discover the consequences of that just in time for Hanukkah and Christmas. But I do get it, of course. Human beings are social creatures. We are by nature people who like to form bonds of friendship and fellowship. And one of the most powerful means of doing this for centuries, and probably for millennia, is getting together over a meal. The idea of breaking bread is more than just a cliche. It's a thing. It's a real thing. Diane and I were discussing the Torah portion for this week the other day. She's doing a Devar Torah for the Museum Minyan in the morning. And she noticed that many of the stories dealing with the patriarchs, and particularly about Jacob, are about transactions. And the transactions are indications of the kind of relationships that people have. Jacob convinces his brother Esau in last week's Torah portion to sell the birthright to him for a bowl of red lentil soup. This is not what we would call a friendly transaction. It is not the usual breaking bread together meal that forms a close bond among friends and family. At the end of last week's portion, we have another breaking bread transaction. Isaac asks his older son Esau to hunt some deer and cook up some tasty venison so that Isaac could give Esau the blessing of the firstborn. But Rebekah and Jacob conspire to trick Isaac into believing that Jacob is Esau and that goat meat was venison. The original plan could be seen as a simple transaction. Esau would bring food for Isaac, and in exchange, Isaac would give Esau a blessing. But I think it was actually intended to be more like the traditional breaking bread together type of transaction. Isaac loves his son's venison, and sharing the meal together would form a father-son emotional bond. No doubt they had shared many such meals together in the past. It was supposed to be about a loving family relationship. But Rebekah and Jacob transformed that transaction into one of deceit and subterfuge, a pretend relationship, rather than an honest one that is deepened and enriched. And now, in this week's Torah portion, Jacob has an encounter with God. And the question is, what is the nature of their relationship? As we know, Jacob ran away from home because his brother Esau sought to kill him for stealing his father's blessing. Jacob never seems to have left home before, ever. No quarantine kept him at home. He just seemed to have never ventured out beyond his own doorstep before. And now he is alone at night, in the middle of nowhere, at the mercy of all the wild animals and other terrors of the night. And he lies down to sleep, using a rock as a pillow, and dreams of God standing atop a stairway to heaven. In Jacob's dream, God promises to watch over him on his journey north and upon his return. In the morning, Jacob wakes up, sets up his stone pillar as a monumental pillar, poured oil on top of it, and then he makes this strange statement. If God remains with me, if he protects me on this journey that I am making, and gives me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and if I return safe to my father's house, then the Eternal One will be my God, and this stone, which I have set up as a pillar, will be a house of God, and of all that you give me, I will set aside a tenth for you. So I ask you, how do we read Jacob's statement here? What kind of relationship does Jacob have with God? Does this statement reflect a simple transactional relationship? You take care of me and I'll let you be my God. I'll even give you a 10% earnings on the return. That is how I have read this passage for years. And that interpretation makes the trickster Jacob, in my opinion, a fairly crass and shallow person. He was terrified the night before, and God promised him protection in his dream, saying, your descendants will be as numerous as the grains of sand on the earth. You will spread out to the west, to the east, to the north, to the south, and all the families of the earth will be blessed by you and your descendants. Remember, I am with you. I will protect you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. That's a very impressive promise, and it should have been a very soothing one for Jacob. And most importantly, it was unconditional. God made this promise to Jacob asking nothing in return. Why then does Jacob wake up in the morning seemingly reassured by God's somnambulant message and make the promise a transactional one? If you will really do what you unconditionally promised me you would do, then I'll give you something in return. This time, as I thought about Jacob's oath, it occurred to me that Jacob really was terrified about being away from home, about the prospect of this long and lonely journey, and about his future when he ultimately returns. He doesn't know how his story will end. We do, because we have read it many times. But he was living the journey. For him, the future was not at all certain. And even though God had appeared to him in a dream, he may still be scared, lonely, even depressed. Instead of seeing his offer of 10% of his earnings to God as an economic transaction, a quid pro quo, perhaps it was in fact motivated by a desire to commit himself to relationship with God. You promised me all of this without expecting anything in return, but I need to be part of this relationship. I want to contribute something to this joint venture, even if it's only a symbolic offering. Moses, after all, had made a similar demand from God. When God promised to pardon the Israelites after the sin of the golden calf, Moses wanted proof from God that God can be so forgiving. So God arranged for Moses to carve 2 new tablets, come up the mountain again so that God proclaimed the fullness of God's capacity to forgive. And Moses there was asking for proof from God that God will fulfill God's promise. And here too, Jacob is trying to ensure that God will keep God's promises to him. Each case can be seen as some kind of contractual transaction, or it can be seen as an effort to deepen their relationships. This year, I've decided to interpret Jacob's statement to God as an attempt to develop and strengthen his relationship with God. After all, how do we build relationships with each other? Most often it occurs over time, breaking bread together with engaging conversations, helping each other out in times of need, physical contact like shaking hands or hugging one another, maintaining the connection over time so that the richness of the relationship unfolds in layer after layer of shared history. These two are a kind of transaction, but not an economic one or a business deal. They're transactions that are born out of trust, respect, honesty, compassion, empathy, and even love. Love is the ultimate of relationships. Thanksgiving is the holiday that nearly all Americans celebrate, a time to give thanks to God for sure, for the food we eat, the clothes that we can wear, the roofs over our heads, the friends and family that surround us, and for all the many other blessings we enjoy but so often overlook. What makes Thanksgiving special is being able to share it with so many others. It is the quintessential American version of breaking bread together. And that is why Thanksgiving this year has been so difficult for so many of us. Some of us have lost friends or family over the past 9 months. Some of us have friends or family in hospitals. Some of us have been working long, hard hours in the hospitals or clinics, doctors, nurses, technicians, and all of the support staff. And we cannot even come together in the usual large numbers to celebrate together over a delicious meal. Sure, we can Zoom or FaceTime, and many of us did just that, but it's not the same. We build our relationships with each other at occasions like this. This is how we show we care for each other, by traveling long distances to meet, by setting aside this time as almost sacred time. It means so much to each of us. This year, we have had to show our love and commitment to each other by not traveling long distances to be together. So we have used new technologies of telephone, Zoom, FaceTime, or whatever, so that we can at least have some connection to maintain our relationships with each other. And this year, that too is a reflection of how much we care for each other. God willing, we will look back on 2020 with hindsight, because hindsight, they say, is 2020. And we will wave goodbye to 2020 in the rearview mirror as we travel forward and continue to build our relationships with each other in the coming years. And one of the ways we will enrich our relationships is by breaking bread together again. Shabbat Shalom, and may God bless.